Greetings, everyone. I'm Stuart Ake. You are tuned into Grateful Dead book reviews, and I am honored to be joined by Howie Abrams, the author of the ABCs of the Grateful Dead.
You
It's a,
mean this?
I mean that. The book pulls upon kind of like the rich visual tapestry and introduces the ideas in a new way to old heads and kind of subverting the dominant paradigm for the next generation of deadheads. Howie, thanks for checking us out this morning.
Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to discussing.
Well, hey, so you've written a lot of books, right? But can you just kind of talk to us kind of through the genesis of like how did this ABC book on the Grateful Dead, a pattern rhyming book, A is for American Beauty,
Mhm.
B is for Bears, etc. What was the genesis of this, and how did it happen, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was 2013, so pushing, a decade and a few
Yep.
years, right? Um, I had begun writing books, and the first book I did was called The Merciless Book of Metal Lists. It's like this ridiculous, book of heavy metal lists. And, again, it was sort of like there's very few genres where you can do a book about minutia about a genre. And a friend of mine who I did the book with, Sasha Jenkins, who sadly has since passed away, did a book called The Book of Rap Lists, which I loved. And so again, if you like minutia, that was your book. It was about absolutely every, you know, stone unturned, aspect of hip hop culture, all of that. And he was a friend, and I said to him, I think there's really only one other genre where you can do something like this, and I think it's metal. So, long story short, we teamed up and we did that book, and that was my first book after, years of working at record labels and all that stuff. So, fast forward, I'm working with a very good friend of mine named Michael McClear, who is a graffiti artist goes by Caves, and we were just throwing around ideas, and we had this idea for a hip hop alphabet book, and so it's a kid's book for the parents, which I think a lot of kids' books are because that's who's reading them, especially the super young readers. So we did like a couple of pages and we sent it out to people, and just birds were chirping. We got nothing. And so we got absolutely no response, in terms of, anything positive anyway. And so it just sat, and it sat for 6 years. And so fast forward, and now I've done a couple of books, and we wound up with an opportunity to do that book. And we finally found someone who said, oh, we love that idea. And we get that it's, for adults, but it's a children's book. And it was a way to introduce, the hip hop culture. So it was aspects of the culture, not just groups or records. And, so we put it together, and we got it, published, and it did very, very well to the point where we got asked to do a second one. So we did number two, and both, did well. A lot of the people who got the first one bought the second one. All right. So I'm going out to San Francisco with my family, and a good friend of mine who is Metallica's day-to-day manager is out there. He works, in their headquarters with, where their studio and their merch company and all of their stuff is. And so I said, let me come out and see you. I've never seen Metallica headquarters, et cetera, et cetera. Ironically, we'll get to it, same town where the Dead was based. And so I go see him. It's this very nondescript, warehouse. And I said, we're just, BSing over coffee, and he gives me a tour. And he's like, hey, I see, these alphabet books that you've done. And like, it looks like everybody is into them. I was like, yeah. He goes, did you ever think of doing something more rock? And I was like, well, funny that you mention it. So Caves and I had already done an L is for Lars Ulrich page, and figuring I'd love to bring this up and show this to him. So I show it to him, and he's just grinning from ear to ear. And he's like, oh man, he goes, I love this. And I think the band will love it too. So I'm like, okay. So he's like, let me show it to them. 3 weeks later, he's like, do you want to do the ABCs of Metallica? So we do the ABCs of Metallica. It does incredibly well. They're amazing partners. You know, they're posting on their social media, reading from the book, and like it really beyond our expectations, you know, and we did really, really great. So then we were like, man, who else can we do something like this with? Because now we've got this credibility from a band that let us do it with them, and they're a huge band, everybody knows. So you can kind of like walk into a lot of people and say, you know, we did this with Metallica. It wasn't like we just did this on the side as fans, which we did, but we had their blessing, we had their cooperation, and all of that. And you would think there would be a lot of bands that are candidates for this treatment, right? But there really, to me, there aren't, because the parents have to be, you know, emotionally involved in the music, right? To buy this for their child. So again, we're like, man, it's actually a little bit slim pickings. Like some of these might be good pages or whatever, but they're not really great books. And so we came up with the dead, right? So I contacted a friend of mine who does like work with their merch company or
Okay.
something. And so he directed me to a lawyer who directed me to another lawyer. And they were like, look, Warner Music does all the like intellectual property stuff for the dead, you know, so like the shot glasses, the ties, you know, everything Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia, whatever. And why don't you contact them? So I did. We wound up having a really great conversation. Again, the Metallica book especially like justifies it to them, you know, where like, all right, these guys are real. They can work with a big company, you know, they hit deadlines, you know, blah, blah, blah. So we came up with the idea to do a dead version of the ABC series. So we did the ABCs of Grateful Dead. And, you know, again, it was so interesting to see the reaction, because to me, the dead isn't as much parents as it is grandparents and great grandparents. So it's kind of a funny thing, right? But you got your parents, right? So you have your younger, you know, the people who only know like Dead and Company, right?
Sure.
But generally speaking, it's like it's so wide ranging, because you have really young people, and then you have like 100-year-olds, you know, and so it was kind of amazing. And you know, we sat down with them and we did the deal, and we learned how they operate, and I learned a lot about the business of the dead
Okay.
um, through them, which I'm more than happy to talk about. There was a lot of rules.
Oh, wow.
Um, they're very protective of their brand, which I
Okay.
found out.
The
There's a
intellectual
lot of
property.
things you can't say or make reference to. So we, you know, we couldn't use any lyrics. Um, and what's interesting is, you know, we're trying to figure out why, and they don't really want to tell you exactly why. And it's just that they're able to be interpreted so many different ways. And the thing is that maybe who wrote them, they don't even know what they mean. So to put them in a book explaining them was kind of a thing they didn't really want to take on. And then you can't, like, we couldn't do, people are like, well, why isn't J for Jerry? And, you know, and it's like, well, you can't, because every member of the band is its own business, its own estate. And Warner would only take responsibility for what falls under the Grateful Dead, right? And so what they can approve on behalf of the living members, the estates, and all of that. So, you know, we had to, even in the making of the book, we would do things where there would be images within the pages, and they were like, you can't do that, you know? So we had to be very on our toes and like change some things and you know, alter some ideas. But ultimately I think it came out really nicely, and it's we got to use their iconography but in a different way, and like either modernize it or just, you know, make it a little bit more kid friendly or fun. You know, even the bears, right? So, you know, these bears don't look exactly like their bears, but you know exactly what they are.
But
So, you
the
know,
band, like the fans have kind of always been, it's been a participant culture. So
yes.
back in the 70s and the 80s, people were making their own t-shirts. maybe cognizant of the intellectual property of the band, but also putting their own unique spin on it. And that's why where I think Caves did such a great job on the visual thing, because you've got the skeletons, you've got roses, right? You've
Warner
got
controls it. Warner controls all of those images.
But it's done in a unique voice where you see it in a different light. And the Deadheads always interpreted the lyrics differently
Of course.
anyway, right? That they were kind of amorphous lyrics, Robert Hunter's lyrics, John Barlow's lyrics, so that it was always kind of open to interpretation. So
Yeah.
I think you got some license. But what's it like writing an ABC book? Like because it's very different than like a long form narrative, I would suppose. I've never done it. So could you just kind of walk us through, like, you choose a letter, K is for kindness or whatever, and then how you build that structure and edit it?
Yeah, I mean, again, the good news is that I was able to do it how I saw it, right? And with the knowledge of the band in mind, and making sure that this was going to appeal, for the most part, to a deadhead in the know, right? Like, so a fan who knows the band, and maybe they're actually going to judge me. You know what I mean? Like, did I nail it, or did I keep the right context, for that letter? And some of them are definitely tougher than others. Like, we had to dig a little bit on a couple of them because we weren't able to use the obvious, right? So we had to dance around that a little bit. But it's not any easier. It's just shorter, So it's really, most of them are just sort of 4-line rhymes, but keeping it simple, just making sure it actually does flow a little bit, right? And keeping it conceptually accurate, right? So just making sure, again, so if you're like my brother-in-law's a major deadhead, my wife's a deadhead, like, if I show this to them, they're going to be like, you got that one, you got it. And unfortunately we did have to explain a bunch, like, yeah, I couldn't do that.
So you did, you collaborated with Caves on this, and you did that with the Hip Hop Alphabet volumes and the Metallica book. I mean, look, very noted street artists, going back to, the Brooklyn stuff, but he's also not only done stuff for the Beastie Boys and everything, but also like
Adidas,
Jaguar,
all kinds
right?
of things. Yeah.
Right. So like big brands representing different areas of the spectrum. So where did you guys meet? And then how did that visual narrative kind of come to light for all of your titles that you've worked on, the 4 visual books?
Well, naturally, we met through music, right? So he's, aside from the artist side, the visual artist side, he's a musician. He was a rapper in a group called Lords of Brooklyn.
Lords of Brooklyn,
and so
of course.
When I worked at Roadrunner Records, the label for Lords of Brooklyn was a block away. And so, he and I knew each other loosely through some mutual friends and things like that. We would cross paths from time to time. And so when Lords of Brooklyn was releasing their first album, Caves put his stamp on like the first single with like this pizza box. And so they like hand delivered the first single to people in a pizza box with a t-shirt and stickers, and like it was this little event in a box, right?
Wow.
And so because I knew them a little bit, they had one delivered to me at the Roadrunner offices. So it's like, pizza guy, and you're getting the Lords of Brooklyn 12-inch. So that's how we sort of met, and then we eventually like got together and hung out and realized that we're both massive Kiss fans. And that's really how we first bonded, right? Where we would talk about Kiss, and then of course it just expands music in general. And we loved hip hop, we loved Kiss, we loved punk, we loved hardcore, we loved metal, all of the stuff, and it just goes on and on and on. So when I was sort of transitioning out of like the record business thing, I went to work for him because he had a tattoo shop out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And he was looking to take what he had done as a graffiti artist and make it. He had been arrested, of course, and
We're confiscating your cans. right?
Yeah. So he was transitioning into legal art, right?
Okay.
And so now like Banksy's out in the news and like all this stuff is happening. It's becoming, graffiti's becoming street art. And he wants to do something similar. Like, how can I apply what I do creatively, to something legal. So I came in there to manage the shop, but I also was helping him to reach out to companies who might want to, work with somebody like him for their graphics. And it worked. And he started to get a lot of gigs. He had already done a couple of things. So like the Beastie Boys thing had happened already. And then he had already done something for Adidas, I think. And I think he worked with like Pony sneakers too, and
Okay.
a couple of other companies. And so we just admired what each other did, and eventually I worked with Lords of Brooklyn as the Lords. I became the record company for a minute, but we just got closer and closer. Like we were people who could sort of finish each other's sentences and do all that. So he was the graphic side guy. I was the words person. And so when I started to work with him, as I said, we came up with this hip hop alphabet idea because we're like, you know, why isn't there a book like this that's sort of educational about hip hop that way? And, there are hip hop children's books, but not an alphabet book. So we came up with this idea. And like I said, it sat there forever. Like nobody wanted it. And, we're like, can it be a children's book that's for the adults? Like, why is that so complicated? And for a lot of people in the book business, the way they want to have things presented to them, it was really complicated.
Got
Right?
it.
You're here or you're here. And so that took a while. And then, we got to eventually do it. And then we did a second one. And then we got the Metallica opportunity. And then we created the Grateful Dead opportunity.
And I just want to say, because I'm a former educator, and a trap that some people do when doing alphabet books is that they use really simple language. A is for apple or whatever it's going to
Yeah.
be. Here, you actually pull upon actual language or something, like you're going to say a terrapin or whatever.
Right.
And kids can take that, right? And you read that same book.
They think they're funny words or something, right?
Yeah, they're a sponge. They take it in. If you
Yes.
say it's a bird, it's going to be a bird. But if you say it's a red-tailed hawk, then in their mind's eye, they're doing a different categorization
Yeah.
system. And so I really appreciated that. Yes, it might be the people who might be reading it aloud to the children are going to be a more mature audience, but the kids are going to pick up on those patterns. And then after, a dozen readings or whatever, they're going to be able to track those words on their own and recognize them in other texts. So,
Yeah, I agree. I agree we thought about that in our approach, that basically cater it to the parents, like the kids, because then it comes to a point sometimes where there's like dark kind of stuff, right?
sure.
And they're like, well, kids. I was like, kids like dark stuff. I was like, you ever hear Halloween and what they decide to make their costumes?
Grimm's fairy
And
tales.
so it's whether it's Dracula or a ghost or something like that. It's like they can take it. Like they're not scared of everything. And so we've had to deal with things like that. But again, it really speaks to me, to the reader, which is the parent, grandparent, great grandparent, so that they understand it, and knowing that the kids are probably smarter than we think.
Always. So you've got this. You just put out the book on Vinny Stigma
Yep.
Of Agnostic Front. What is on the horizon?
Well, it's funny because, there's definitely some book ideas in there. And someone just approached me about doing a book about my first record label, which was called In Effect Records, which was very short-lived, but we had like a very nice impact in like the hardcore and underground, like aggressive metal scene. And so it's a company called Tribal. And the guy's done really cool books. It's like he does coffee table books and things for tattoo artists, like about their art and their approach and things like that. But he's done a few music books as well. He's a music guy. He had a record label and all kinds of things. And so he just approached me about doing like an In Effect book, you know. So we're going to do that. I was just talking to him this morning about like the arc of the book, and you know, we're getting someone who does a really great blog called No Echo, who's going to do the interview with me, and cover all the bases and do all that. But even right now, as we speak, I just finished directing a documentary, my first. And so, yeah, so we just did this. It's called Heavy Healing. And what it's about, and inspired by a friend of mine, Seth Abrams, no relation, believe it or not, but somebody did something, somebody down the road. He approached me while I was doing books, and he was a very healthy guy, a little younger than me, and out of nowhere, he's a marathon runner, you know, like no body fat people you can't stand because you can eat a cake and they don't gain any weight. He has an aortic aneurysm, right? And his doorman of his building like saw him like not looking well and called an ambulance and sent him to the hospital. And you know, it turns out his heart was bleeding for like 2 days or something like that. They patched him up. He was doing fine. The day he's going to go home, he has 2 strokes, and you know, partially paralyzing, tough. And so he's still partially paralyzed, but he has a great spirit about him, and you know, like doesn't really let things go in his way. He goes to shows, whatever. So he said, you know, I used suicidal tendencies, you can't bring me down, as my rallying cry, like during my whole ordeal. So whether it was to go to physical therapy or to whatever, and he goes, God, there's so many people and band members and fans and whatever who use this like aggressive music to heal and recover from things. So he's like, we know tons of them, right? Vinny Stigma being one of them, actually. Sure. He's a cancer survivor. And, you know, so, you know, maybe there's a book about these people. And I thought about it and I'm like, you know what? I don't know if it's a book. I think it's a film, because the emotional value of these people telling their stories, I think, is bigger than a book and bigger than reading it. Maybe there's a book that accompanies it at some point, but I think it's a film. So he and I enlisted another friend of ours, Jamie York, who's a photographer, who's done, you know, a couple of music videos here and there, but mostly is like a still photographer. And so we're like, you want to be partners with us and you can shoot this thing? And he goes, yeah, and I can edit too. I'm like, okay. So basically, we made a movie. So the three of us who've never done this just made a movie. And we interviewed, you know, a ton of band members. And so it's everything from, you know, cancer to mental health to AIDS to diabetes to blood diseases to, you know, it's all over the place. And we have this movie. So we just submitted it to I think about 10 film festivals, and we're booking some screenings for the first time for early next year. And you know, we just signed an agreement with a company who's going to pitch the film for digital distribution for the apps, and you know, they may make Blu-rays at some point. I'm not sure anybody watches those, but I'm not sure. And you know, so we're, oh, you do, okay, good, at least, oh, so we can sell one maybe. But
yeah, you got a
copy. I don't have a player, like I don't even know. I was like, what's the difference between DVD and Blu-ray? Shit, I don't know. But so we have this movie, and you know, we have an Instagram page called Heavy Healing Film, and so if you want to find it there and keep up with us. But you know, we're just sort of getting it underway. The movie's been done for maybe 4 weeks.
That's fantastic. And get and like you said, if it gets on the festival circuit and stuff like that, or Silver Docs or something like that, would be fantastic. And it helps you. You're going to rise above. We're going to rise above, pulling from a certain band.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to thank you for joining us and helping shed light, and we'll put the link to the film as well, so everyone can check.
I appreciate that.
Hey, Howie, thanks for carving out some time, chatting about the book, and everybody, again, the ABCs of the Grateful Dead with Howie Abrams and Cave's incredible illustrations. Hey, everybody, thank you.
Thank you.